This is episode number 25 with Joel Jamieson.
People just don't understand how much their life impacts their fitness or how much life impacts their recovery and their ability to handle training. And they see these two separate things. You know, your body was already under quite a bit of stress from having your blood pressure and your heart rate elevated all day, dealing with life stress. Now you can go to the gym and put it under more stress for 60 minutes of high intensity. You're just asking for problems down the road.
Welcome back to another episode of Anchors of Health, where it's all about helping you achieve the best health you possibly can. And I do that by bringing on world-class experts on the 4 key anchors of health, which is mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. Within each, it's all about finding what works for you. I'm your host, Bill Choi, and today's episode is under the recovery anchor. And this is actually the episode that puts health all together. This is how health is created. Every episode, we talk individually about mindset, nutrition, movement, and recovery. But how well do you put it all together and manage it? How do you manage all the stressors in your life? You know, there's times when you need to push at work, in the gym, with life, with kids, and there's times when you need to back off and recover. So how do you allocate all the things in your life that require energy? It's about the total picture of your lifestyle, and it's all connected. And to talk about this is none other than Joel Jamieson, who's a best-selling author and one of the world's foremost authorities on strength, conditioning, and energy systems, one of my favorite coaches, and his training strategies have been used by thousands of elite performers and top athletes worldwide, including Navy SEALs, UFC champions like Demetrious, who is the best mixed martial artist of all time, and dozens of teams from the NFL, NBA, MLS, and NCAA. I mean, Joel has literally done it all, and he is the most knowledgeable person on something we will talk about on this episode called heart rate variability. And, you know, I've been using this piece of technology that he came out with since 2013 every single morning, and it's a game changer. I'm actually excited for my wife to listen to this because she's been putting up with me doing this every single morning for 3 minutes, and now she can finally hear what it's all about. It's actually the only fitness technology that I use because I avoid EMF as much as possible. And actually, I consider it more of an overall health technology. So I'm excited for you to listen to this as well. But before we get into it, I want to give a quick shout out to Dubai Jerry, who took the time to leave me an awesome rating and review. He wrote, "Hey Bill, your podcasts are just awesomeness. Huge thanks for your research, wonderful guest, and amazing delivery. You have just found a big fan here in Dubai. I'm now a firm subscriber. More, please." Thanks so much for leaving that review. And that's what it's all about. That's what keeps me going on this podcast. The more I hear from you, that's what gives me energy to keep providing you with amazing content. So let me know how you feel. You can go to my website, anchorsofhealth.com, and you'll see a button on the bottom that says leave a rating and review. Just click that button and it'll take you straight to iTunes. You can also email me at anchorsofhealth@gmail.com. And as always, if you want the show notes and links to everything we discussed in this episode, just head over to anchorsofhealth.com/25. So let's jump right in. Here's my conversation with performance architect Joel Jamieson. Joel, welcome to the Anchors of Health podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
So Joel, I've been following your work for a very long time, as you know. But for our listeners that don't know you, can you give us a glimpse into your coaching journey and highlight some of the biggest aha moments along the way that shaped you into the coach that you are today?
Well, it's definitely been a long journey. I started back in the early 2000s and started at the University of Washington as a strength coach, working primarily with football players and kind of strength power athletes. Followed a coach named Bill Gillespie, who was my original mentor, over to Seahawks for about a year in the NFL, and then decided to open my own gym. And, really kind of my career had been based around strength and power athletes and football players, and that's where I planned to go. And then just by happenstance, my gym that I opened ended up being next to a combat sports facility, and I started working with combat athletes, which took my career in a totally different direction because all of a sudden I realized that strength and power wasn't the only thing these guys needed, because I went over and trained them myself, and I was a lot stronger, but I didn't last more than 30 seconds before I was in the ground crying because their conditioning was so much better than mine. So that was kind of the big twist and turn to start my career, was going away from strength and power, not going away from it, but at least being taken in a new direction and working with a new sport that was really, at that point, very unknown. In the next few years, of course, combat sports started exploding, and people wanted to learn more about conditioning, and I basically kind of followed that path along. And 2009 or so, I created my website 8 weeks out, and really just did it because there was so much misinformation out there about conditioning and training for combat sports and different sports as well. So I started writing articles and wrote a book, and it took off. And that was really, something I hadn't planned on doing either, but people were interested in the information, they were looking for it. So I kept on writing, and then that turned into, speaking and consulting and doing a lot of things outside the gym as well. And, really kind of took my career again in a little bit different path, because I never planned on writing a book or being online or doing that sort of thing. But it just kind of worked out that way. 2012, I released a technology called BioForce HRV, based on some technology I'd been using for a number of years that evaluates stress and fatigue and recovery levels and kind of how people respond to training. And that did really well. Also, I was pretty early on into the fitness technology space and learned a whole lot from that. And again, it was just kind of another aspect of my journey. And then really just kind of been building ever since. I have a mixture of stuff. I still have the gym and do some coaching there. I consult with a bunch of organizations and teams. I worked with a big company called Lifetime Fitness for last year and helping them develop their personal training program. I have an online certification course that teaches coaches and athletes how to improve their conditioning. I have a new software technology called Morpheus that looks at recovery. So I've really kind of done a wide variety of things over the course of my career. A lot of it's been, somewhat unintentional. You just kind of see a demand for information. There's something missing that people want to learn more about, and then I start talking about it, and somehow it ends up being where I go for the next few years. So my career seems to have just kind of meandered through different areas of fitness, but it's been a great journey so far.
Right, and early on, you mentioned that there was a mixed martial arts gym next to your facility, and that's not just any mixed martial arts gym. That's Matt Hume's gym.
Yep. Yeah, that turned out to be the best in the world, really. I mean, it was complete. I like to say it was planned, but it was literally complete luck. I mean, I knew the gym was there, but I had no idea the level of athlete I'd be working with there, or that Matt Hume was there, who's definitely the best coach, in the world. I was there a few months, and next thing I know, I've got a fighter walking over and asking me if I can train him for a huge fight over in Japan, and for a sport I'd never trained before. So it was, it was eye opening to all of a sudden be not just training a new sport, new athletes, but for the highest level of the sport itself. I mean, I was training world champions within a year or so of being open. So it was a sink or swim scenario. I had to figure this out and had to figure out how to get people in better shape and improve their conditioning, because their careers were dependent on me, and I barely knew the sport, so I really had to dive in head first.
And what would you say is the most important lesson you learned from Matt Hume?
I've learned a lot of lessons from Matt Hume, because he's definitely the best coach in the game, as far as I'm concerned, and the best coach in combat sports that's ever been around. But the biggest thing is, he is unbelievable at knowing every element of his sport. There's no area of combat sports or combat sports training that he does not know and is not a true expert at. So the biggest thing I learned is, to be an effective world-class level coach, you have to know every aspect of what you're doing inside and out. And there's a lot of coaches out there that are really, really good at one part of their sport, and maybe they know something extremely well, but there's another area of the sport or training that maybe they're totally unfamiliar with, and they don't quite have the same level of expertise. But Matt can do literally everything in combat sports. He trains the grappling, he trains the striking, he trains the wrestling, he does all the fight planning, does literally the whole thing from top to bottom, and that's what makes him so effective, because he can put together all the puzzle pieces in a way that nobody else can. So, really what it comes down to is just, you've got to continually learn, you've got to continually evolve, you've got to continually be studying your craft, and that's something that I've watched Matt do from the beginning. He's never stopped, growing as a coach, and he's never stopped evolving his own game. And so that was probably the biggest thing I've seen is, he's never content. He's always trying to get better. He's always trying to make his athletes better. And that's the biggest lesson I think you can take away from him.
And something you mentioned there that kind of stood out to me. So you actually went into the environment of your fighters and actually tried to experience firsthand yourself what that felt like. And that just goes to show you that, we all have these preconceived notions about something. It could be anything, but until you actually experience it, you don't really fully understand. So how important is that for you, putting yourself in a position that may be uncomfortable, but doing it anyway because it's going to be a tremendous learning experience? I
think that was hugely valuable. I mean, like I said, my background was in football and strength and power. And so, my first instinct when I started training the guys originally was, I just need to make them stronger. That's what I was familiar with. That's what I knew how to do. And I was, testing these guys, and they were extremely weak by my standards. So, if I had not gone over there and trained with them, I would have just kept thinking, like, these guys need to get stronger. These guys need to get stronger. But as soon as I went over there and actually trained with them, even though I was vastly stronger than them, like I said, my strength lasted 30 seconds, maybe a minute. And then I was completely gassed out on the floor, and they were, going on from there 20 minutes. So it was that experience where I was like, wow, I really don't know what the hell I'm doing with these guys. I better learn, because, obviously my thought was wrong. Strength wasn't the answer, because I was far stronger, and it didn't really matter when I was totally gassed out. So if I hadn't, put myself in that position, if I hadn't experienced that, I would have had no idea. And then I also, I just started doing all the training with them. I did the morning sessions, I did the evening sessions, and I just tried to experience what it was like going through their entire day, their entire week. And I had a much better appreciation of just how much training and how much stress they were under from combat sports. And that's something that's easy to miss if you're only seeing their strength conditioning and you're not actually pushing yourself through their sports training. It's easy to think, that you can do more than you necessarily should. So I realized really quickly, I was doing too much originally. I needed to scale back, because their skills training was so demanding that they couldn't do 4 days a week of strength conditioning the way I originally planned, or the way an off-season athlete would do. They weren't ever really in the off-season, and the only way I could have seen that was going through an actual training week with them. So, it's a totally unfamiliar sport, or something completely unfamiliar with. I think the more elements of it you can experience, the more effective it's going to make you.
Absolutely. And Joel, a couple of years ago, I received an email from you with the subject headline, "The most important article I've ever written for you," and it was about your mom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the day was April 25th, 2008, and you regarded that day as the worst day of your life. Can you tell us what happened and how that impacted your view on fitness and health?
Yeah, so that was the day where my mom actually had a stroke, and my mom and I were extremely close, and she was a flight attendant, and she was down in Miami actually on a trip. She was based in New York, and just on a trip down there, and she unfortunately had a stroke and ended up in the hospital, and thankfully she pulled through, but it's definitely left her quite a bit crippled compared to her previous health, and she wasn't able to ever return to work, and obviously it was an incredibly horrific experience to go through. And I got a call from the hospital basically saying that my mom was in the hospital and she had a stroke, and they really couldn't tell me anything more about it. So I had no idea if she was can ever walk or talk or have memory or even survive, and I had to jump on a flight and fly down there without even knowing what was going to happen, and then just dealing with the aftermath of seeing her entire life change from that day forward was really hard to deal with. And obviously something that most people have to deal with at some point or other, but really what it just showed me was the importance of conditioning and fitness, not just for combat athletes or football players, but for everyday people that just want to live longer and stay around for their kids and avoid the strokes and heart attacks. And then I dug into the research, and you start to realize just how many people are having heart attacks and having strokes. I mean, 1 out of every 3 people in the U.S. that die will do so from some cardiovascular related death or disease. So it's it's an insane statistic if you think about 1 out of every 3 people. That's what they're going to die from. So I really just kind of took my my research and studying and training to how do we do something about this, and how do we use training, and how do we use lifestyle factors and everything else to help prevent that, so that people don't have to deal with that, and at least don't have to deal with the same level of 30% of the population going down that road. So that really kind of opened my eyes, and again, just kind of took my writing and studying a bit different direction than combat sports and into the everyday person's life.
And your mom on the outside looked perfectly healthy, right? Like she had no preconditions of anything. She looked fine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she was like 105 pounds. She was obviously active. She was a flight attendant, so she was walking around every city she'd go to. She'd never smoked a cigarette in her life. She didn't drink. She'd never, didn't really have any of the outward signs, you would think. You always think of people having heart attacks or strokes as being terribly out of shape and smoking and drinking. And the reality is, like, that's not the case a lot of the time. I mean, certainly those are risk factors that increase the likelihood, but people having strokes like my mom that have no outward symptoms, that aren't overweight, that didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't have any of the things, but what she did have was an extremely stressful job combined with some bad genetics that led to, that having a stroke. And so really that's the thing I think that I learned the most, and that people need to understand, is that, you don't have to have all these outward warning signs to be at risk for these things. If your life is stressful and your job is stressful and you're not taking care of yourself, you're not getting sleep, you're not recovering, you're not resting, those things all add up. And then if you have that plus a combination of genetics, it's really just a matter of time before you do have some terrible thing happen. Maybe it's not a full-blown stroke, but maybe it's some other debilitating disease that slows you down, or it's something else that ultimately keeps you away from the life you want to live.
Absolutely. And I'm starting to see now where all these, your background, your experience and training, I see you kind of like connecting all these dots. So you have all this data over the years. You've worked with thousands and thousands of athletes and people. Like, what would you say is the biggest problem in fitness today?
Biggest problem in fitness, I think, is people trying to do too much, and mistaking hard work and thinking that's really all it takes. And the reality is it's the total picture of someone's entire lifestyle. It's how they're dealing with stress of their life. It is how much sleep they're getting. It's what their training program looks like. It's what they're eating. It's all these sorts of things. And people, in my view, the biggest mistake is people have a disconnect between what happens inside the gym and what happens outside the gym. They don't realize how truly connected those two things are. So if someone works, a 10-hour day and they're completely stressed out from deadlines at work or family life or whatever, that takes a physical toll and it takes energy to deal with that. And then they go to the gym and they think they can do a 60-minute or 90-minute high intensity session. What they've just done is put their body in a massive hole that it's going to have a very hard time getting out of. So I think the biggest thing, like I said, is that people just don't understand how much their life impacts their fitness, or how much life impacts their recovery and their ability to handle training. And they see these two separate things. And a lot of times, I'm stressed out from work, so I'm going to go blow off steam at the gym. Well, your body was already under quite a bit of stress from having your blood pressure and your heart rate elevated all day, dealing with life stress. And now you're going to go to the gym and put it under more stress for 60 minutes of high intensity. You're just asking for problems down the road. You're asking for, either A, a lack of results or plateau, or B, you're actually doing probably more damage to your health than you are good. So I think that's the biggest thing I would say, is people just don't really see the connection between their lifestyle outside the gym and what should be taking place inside the gym.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I've trained many people over the years, and I would say that 99% of them think that in order to get a good workout, they need to get their ass kicked, right? And I mean, Just a few months ago, I had this one friend that was telling me that he would dread going to see his personal trainer because he knew he was going to get crushed. But here's the thing. He wanted to get crushed. So on one end, he feared and wanted to back out from going to see his trainer. And on the other side, he felt that was what was needed in order for him to reach his goal. So it's this mindset that people tend to have that's just, they need to get past.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's a combination. It's what the fitness industry perpetuates, honestly. It's what we have, not me personally, but in general, the market has gone out there and said high intensity does great things, and 8 minutes of high intensity is better than 60 minutes of moderate intensity, and go hard or go home, and all these stereotypes and cliches have been built into the marketing to the point where the client walked in the gym. It's probably not that your friend wants that so much as he thinks that's what the client needs. So the client thinks like, right, hey, if I don't get my ass kicked, I'm not going to see any results. So it's not that he wants to get his ass kicked; he wants the results, and he thinks you get his ass kicked is a way to actually get them.
Exactly.
And so I think it's that is the mindset of, hey, I've got to crush myself or I didn't get any benefit, and that mindset is totally wrong, and that's what we need to change.
And part of that change is this tool that called heart rate variability. I've been using your BioForce HRV every morning since 2013. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. So and now it's called Morpheus, the new edition of it. Now, before we get into HRV, at the heart of it is the autonomic nervous system. So can you explain what that is? Kind of like a quick 101 on that and how it works.
Yeah, so most people have heard of the central nervous system that basically fires your muscles and helps you walk around and learn how to do tasks and skills. But what people are less familiar with what's called the autonomic nervous system. And it sounds like automatic, and that's essentially what it's trying to do, is it's regulating a lot of things that have to happen in your body to keep you alive. And what most of that ultimately comes down to is energy, right? Your body has a limited amount of energy it can produce in a day, and that energy has to be used to keep you alive, right? Every cell, every tissue, every single thing in your body has to have energy all day long or 24/7 in order for you to stay alive. And so what the autonomic nervous system does is help A, make sure your body and your metabolism is working to create that energy, and then B, distribute that energy where it needs to be distributed to do whatever it is you're trying to do. So it's broken into two halves, and that's called the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic's job is essentially to divert energy into stress, into activity, into training, into all the things that we think of. We hear the stress response, we think fight or flight. Well, that's what the sympathetic system is doing, is it's diverting energy into our body's working muscles, tissues, and it's diverting it into our brain function. It's making sure that we can move around and deal with stress. The other side is the parasympathetic nervous system, and that actually starts distributing energy into rest and digestion and rebuilding and recovery and remodeling and making things bigger and stronger and faster, immune system function, and all these sorts of things. So again, the whole point here is the body has only so much energy it can create in a day. Your metabolism is limited. I don't care how much food you eat. I don't care what you do, your body can only produce a certain amount of energy in a single day. So the autonomic nervous system's job is fundamentally to figure out where energy needs to go into your body, whether it's to deal with the stress of working out, whether it's to deal with the stress of work, or whether it's to go into rebuilding muscle tissues or tendons or ligaments or whatever, to make them bigger, stronger, and faster. It's really primarily about taking the energy your body produces and making sure it goes where it needs to go. That's what the autonomic nervous system does.
And the closest thing that we have to tracking this and having a sense of management or control over it is this heart rate variability, right? So can you kind of maybe get into the history of what this is and then how you kind of created this in a very user-friendly way?
Yeah, so heart rate variability has been around for many, many years. It was actually developed back in the 50s and 60s by the Russians for their space program, and they essentially figured out that from space they could beam down a heart rate signal, and they realized that there was more information in that heart rate signal than just heart rate. There was actually a whole other layer of information that gave them insight into how the autonomic nervous system was functioning. Specifically, it was a gauge of that parasympathetic nervous system, which again forces energy or shuttles energy into rest and digestion and recovery and all these sorts of things. So it was a gauge of how much stress their astronauts or cosmonauts were under when they're in space. And then after that, it kind of went through lots of different phases of research in the medical industry, and eventually came around to athletic populations in the Soviet Union in the 1980s and 90s, and was really studied by the U.S. military quite a bit in the 90s, and then eventually it made its way into mobile devices, and I was kind of one of the first to figure out how do you put HRV technology into a mobile app, because I'd been using the system since early 2000s. There's a computer software system.
And how much? And Joe, how much did that cost?
Yeah, that was $35,000 at the time, right? So it was It was a lot of money. Obviously, people aren't going to spend that. So, I was early in the game of figuring out, okay, how do we take this information that I've used to train all my athletes and people I've worked with and make it accessible for everybody? And that's what BioForce HRV was really about. Again, that was like 2011, 2012, and it was like pretty early into the fitness technology realm, and it was really the first glance the average person was able to get of what heart rate variability looked like. And the biggest thing people saw was exactly what I said. They had no idea of how much being stressed out at work, or how much not getting enough sleep, or how much some drinks the night before would affect their ability to train the following day. So it was just it was really cool to have the ability to share that information with so many people, because I'd been seeing it for so long with my own clients, my own athletes, but the average person that I didn't work with obviously had never seen that before. So it was really just an eye-opener for a lot of people to fundamentally see how much their life outside the gym affected them more than the gym itself 99% of the time.
Right. And so can you kind of give our listeners a little bit more information on what HRV is actually tracking in compared to just checking your heart rate?
Yeah, sure. So it's essentially looking at the pattern of your heart rate. And in that pattern, we can see how much that parasympathetic nervous system is active, and therefore how much stress, or where your body is diverting energy to, I should say. When the parasympathetic nervous system is low, it produces a certain pattern of heart rate, and that tells us that fight or flight system is on and energy is being diverted into dealing with stress. When the parasympathetic nervous system is higher, we see a different pattern of heart rate, and that tells us the body is putting energy into rest and digestion and recovery and all these sorts of things. So it shows us through the pattern of the heart rate itself. So it's not just 63 beats a minute, but actually the pattern of how those 63 beats a minute are being distributed. That tells us how the autonomic nervous system is functioning, and that tells us essentially how well the body's responding to training and life stress, how well someone's recovering, and what their overall ability to continue to train and deal with stress is. So the biggest things, like I said, it's looking at the pattern of heart rate, and from that information we can get a whole lot more understanding of how someone's doing than just by looking at how many times the heart rate's beating a minute. So it's just a whole different layer of information.
And what would you say is the difference between, because there's a lot of fitness tracking tools out there. What would you say is the difference between HRV and all these other Fitbits and things that you're seeing out there today?
Yeah, most of those things are just kind of telling you what you did in terms of, you took 1,000 steps or 10,000 steps, or I burned 500 calories in this workout, or they're really just kind of telling you, fairly obvious, or not just not super valuable information other than what you did. The biggest thing is those are all external variables, right? How far you went, or how much weight you lifted, or whatever. The HRV itself is telling you how your body actually responded to those things. How well was it able to handle that? How much stress your body actually see from that amount of activity, and how well is it going to recover from that? How long is it going to take you to recover from that? It's giving you a much more internal gauge. And the other really interesting thing is that a lot of the research now is showing HRV correlates to inflammation in the body. So basically what we see is lower HRV is higher in inflammation, and higher HRV means lower inflammation in general. So we're getting this big global picture of inflammation in the body, which we now know is hugely tied towards cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all these sorts of things tend to have a very strong inflammatory component. So as a single number, HRV correlates with life expectancy, HRV correlates with risk for cardiovascular disease, it correlates with decision making, it correlates with a huge variety of different health markers, because again, it's tied so closely to your body's ability to handle stress and your body's ability to turn off inflammation once that stress is over. So, how many activity, how much you walked and how many calories you burned, that's all important. That's great information. But we really want to get to the heart of the big picture, and that's looking at HRV and how the body, is responding, and what sort of inflammation is going on, and how the body's, repairing itself. And that tells us far more information than just, how many miles you walked or how many calories you burned.
And also, I'll just note there that your new Morpheus you can actually take the data from all those different technologies, and it'll actually be utilized in your Morpheus as well to spit out the data absolutely. As well, right?
Yeah, we want basically the whole point of Morpheus is I wanted to help people connect all the dots. So the original system, Bioforce, gave you HRV, and that's hugely valuable. But what I wanted to do is help people see kind of the whole picture of what was causing their changes in HRV and how it all put together to equal their recovery. So Morpheus, like you said, looks at your activity, it looks at your sleep, it looks at your heart rate variability, it looks at your training, it looks at how you feel, and it puts all those pieces together for you, and then gives you an actual recovery score, which tells you essentially how your body is handling everything you're doing. And then from that, it creates training zones for you to help either improve your conditioning and accelerate your recovery, prevent overtraining, all those sorts of things. So I wanted to finally build something that could connect the dots between everyone's lifestyles and their actual training and what they need to be doing. And that's really the goal of Morpheus.
And can you kind of walk them through what they exactly need to do every single morning to get this information?
Yeah, sure. So we created this recovery band. It slides in your forearm or your calf. You sit there, it's a 2.5 minute test, and it basically is looking at your heart rate variability. And you just connect it to your phone, it goes to the test, asks you, a couple of questions about your sleep quality and soreness and those sorts of things. And like you said, if you're using a Fitbit or you're using some other activity tracker, it can connect with most of them, and it'll pull in your sleep data if you're tracking it, and it can pull in your activity data if you're tracking it. If you're not, then you just tell Morpheus how many hours you slept, so it can look at it that way. And so again, from that 3-minute test of total time, it's going to give you your actual recovery score for the day, and then your heart rate zones for the day. So then when I go into train, if my recovery is in the lower end, then it's going to give me a heart rate zone I can stay in to help promote recovery. If my recovery is in the higher end and I want to do some conditioning work, it's to give me a specific heart rate zone to improve my conditioning. So I wanted to build something that's very easy to use. If your people are wearing trackers 24/7, it's not going to force you to wear a second one. It's just going to use what you've already got. It's going to pull that information into your score and give you the recovery scores results. If you don't want to wear a tracker all day long, you don't want to wear something 24/7, you don't have to. Morpheus can use your internal phone sensor to track your activity, and you can just tell Morpheus how many hours you slept and what your sleep quality was. So I tried to make something that was as flexible as possible. If people have their devices, now they can make the information more valuable. If they don't have the other devices, or they don't want to wear something 24 hours a day, they certainly don't have to. Either way, Morpheus can give you that recovery score, tell you what it all means, and then give you specific heart rate zones for the data training to make you better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that stuck out to me when I first started using it was, I'd have maybe a template of what I was going to do for the week in the gym. And, maybe Monday and Friday were days that I was going to crush it in the gym. But then I would get a reading on my Bioforce, Morpheus now, telling me that I needed to recover. So I wouldn't go in there and crush it. I might need to just do a recovery workout, or I might just need to skip the workout totally in general. So that's something that's great about it.
Yeah, I think it just makes your training much more personalized to your lifestyle. I think that's what people are missing. And once you start to see the effects of just living your life on your body, you realize that your lifestyle plays such a big role in your ability to recover and your health and wellness. So rather than just layering sessions on top of that, you need to actually put the sessions in line with your lifestyle, with what's going on. So again, if you don't sleep very well, if you're stressed out from work, or who knows what you're stressed out from, all those things play a role in your recovery. So if you're already under stress and your recovery is already lower, going into the gym and crushing yourself is just going to put you again more in the hole versus, hey, I'm going to go in and do a recovery workout today, and then the next day I'm going to come back and my body's in a much better shape to actually handle high intensity training. So it's it just allows you to personalize your training on a whole new level. And you realize, that's the missing link for most people, is having that personalization. And rather than, again, just layering training on top of their lifestyle, actually putting the two together, it makes everything so much more effective.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, the biggest benefit for me has been an increased awareness of how all the various stresses in my life are affecting me, and proactively doing something about it and making the necessary adjustments. So for me, it's been a huge health and wellness tool, actually. And I mean, I originally bought it with the intention of maximizing my training results, which it did tremendously. But then I started to notice that I was able to increase my control over whether or not I would get sick or not. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but because we know how stress affects your immune system, so by controlling your stress, you're able to manage your immune system better. I mean, what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you start to see, like you said, how all these different things affect you, you can optimize and you can improve, and you can be so much more aware of things that you do that are going to decrease your health and wellness. You can avoid them. And we've seen lots of times where people are like, oh, my HRV looks really bad, but I feel fine. And then 2 days later, they get sick. Well, now, next time that happens, they can see their HRV is low and they can see the warning signs. Again, instead of going to the gym and pushing themselves, they can make sure they get enough sleep, they can get more hydrated, they can, be more proactive about it and actually prevent themselves from getting sick and feeling the full outcomes of it. So, again, a lot of it's just learning how your body actually works. It's like having a little window into your own body, and the more you learn about it, the more you can start to, change things and be proactive rather than just wait until you get sick. You can see it coming and prevent it, and you can do all these things that otherwise you would just have no information and no idea what's going on. And it kind of opens the black box up in my mind, really, and lets you see what's going on underneath the hood, and then you can play with it and optimize it and change it and do all these things that you have never had the ability to do before.
And that's a good point, because there's people listening to this right now that might be thinking, like, why can't I just make the adjustments based on how I feel? What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, if it was that simple, then everybody would be doing that, right? I mean, there's not always a direct 100% link between how you feel necessarily and what the body is actually doing. There's typically, a bit of a lag there. And sometimes, we feel great, but under the hood, again, our body is headed towards sickness. It takes 2 days for us to actually realize that full outcome. HRV is a much more leading indicator, right? So if you don't feel something, it's usually because it hasn't happened yet. It doesn't mean you're not going to. And the whole point is to be out in front of that, right? So again, like I said, a lot of times people will see their HRV look something like, I feel fine. 2 days later, they've got a cold, or 2 days later, they get sick, or like, oh, my HRV says, I'm fine, but I went to the gym, I did a good workout, and then 2 days later, they pull a hamstring or whatever happened. So it just allows you to see much more forward, not necessarily into the future, but you just get a much more forward look at what's actually happening inside your body. And if you wait until you feel something, typically, that's too late to make the necessary change. You've already kind of gone too far in that direction. So it's just, it's like driving with GPS. You can actually see the turns ahead of you versus trying to figure it out as you're going. That's really the biggest difference.
And there's actually a link between HRV scores and longevity as well, right? There's studies actually on this, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. It's as a single metric, a single number, it is the number one predictor of longevity, simply because, again, it represents parasympathetic nervous system, it represents the ability to deal with inflammation, it represents the ability to deal with stress, all those sorts of things. So there is no other single number out there that correlates to life expectancy and longevity better than heart rate variability. It predicts life expectancy better than pretty much anything else we have. It's better than blood pressure, it's better than cholesterol, it's better than any of these kind of traditional health markers you get from the doctor. As a single number, it will predict your life expectancy better than anything else, simply because, like I said, it's so tied into how your body is handling stress, and it's tied into how your body is feeling inflammation, and all those things have such powerful implications in your health, wellness, and longevity that it's able to provide that level of insight prediction.
And why do you think more people don't know about this? I mean, over the last, I would say 2 years, I've seen more and more people kind of know what this is about, but why do you think it's not as popular, not as well known in the mainstream?
Yeah, it's getting there. When I first was using it in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and I would go to a clinic and I'd ask people who's heard of it. I mean, literally nobody would raise their hand. And now, I would say the high level trainers and coaches are pretty familiar with it, or at least heard of it, and more people in the population. But part of it's just, it's until Morpheus, I think it took a bit of nuanced, understanding. So, for example, your HRV going up can be good or it can be bad. Your HRV going down can be good or it can be bad. There's a little bit of explanation, there's a little bit of understanding that has to go into that. It's not a super simple, up is always good, down always bad. There's a little bit of nuance to it. And then the other thing is, people just didn't really understand how it related back to their lifestyle or what it meant in terms of training. So I'm hoping to change that with Morpheus. Like I said, it takes your HRV and all these other variables, and it just gives you a recovery score. And higher is always higher recovery, and lower is always lower recovery. So I just think that HRV itself, it takes some work to understand what's really telling you. It's not as easy as just having a recovery score. And so I think that's what's been missing, is just taking that information and giving people some more straightforward feedback. What's your recovery score? What are your heart rate zones? So hopefully, as more and more people start to use Morpheus and more solutions start to come out that give you the simple information you really want, the more powerful it become. But it's definitely grown in leaps and bounds from where it was when I started using it. So I think we'll continue to see that.
Yeah, it definitely has. And what would you say are the best ways to improve your overall HRV score?
Well, there's a lot of things to it. I mean, like I said, just the biggest correlation we see is heart rate variability equals aerobic fitness in a lot of ways. So aerobic conditioning tends to increase heart rate variability for a variety of reasons that are tied to mitochondria, and immune system function, all sorts of stuff in the body. So number one is, having a decent level of aerobic conditioning is going to increase your HRV. Number two, is just taking care of the lifestyle factors. So eating the right amount of calories, getting enough sleep, learning how to shut off the stress response, which is really the most important thing your average person needs to learn. Is it's one thing to be stressed while you're sitting there at work, but it's another thing to be stressed 24 hours a day because you're thinking about work when you're not at work, or training, and then you're thinking about training. It's learning how to turn off that sympathetic nervous system so your body can turn on the parasympathetic nervous system and shuttle energy into recovery, where you're actually going to make the real progress in training. So, it's a combination of factors. It's living a lifestyle that's designed around your body. It's developing some aerobic conditioning to help support parasympathetic nervous system function. And then it's just mentally learning how to deal with stressors of life, again, in a way that's going to not keep that sympathetic nervous system on all day long, but it's going to allow the parasympathetic system to do its job. So it's the combination of those factors.
And can you give our listeners some basic principles around how to use recovery and regeneration strategies effectively? Because there's a lot of things out there like cryo, sauna, massage. Can you kind of talk about, give them kind of like an outline on how to approach those things?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you one thing. I think those are all Band-Aids, I would say, is probably the way to look at them. If your recovery is really low and it's a problem, then those things can help stimulate. But really, recovery comes from your bigger picture of your lifestyle. So, it's not a good idea to run yourself into the ground just so you can go use the cryo or sauna or whatever. So what I've tended to do now is start with, the big picture of someone's lifestyle. So just looking at their sleep, looking at how well they can deal with the stress of life, looking at nutrition, and then look at their training. And then I've started to use training in a way that can actually promote and boost recovery. I call it rebound training. It's essentially, a pattern of lifts, a pattern of exercises, and a way of training in different areas that promote the body to shift into that recovery zone. So I think the modalities of the cryo and the therapy, ice and float tanks, those are all fine and good, but you've got to have the foundation first. And that comes from, again, your lifestyle, your training, your sleep, nutrition, all those sorts of things. And, again, the biggest thing I've been using the last, year or two is what I call, again, rebound training, because it's a way to get in the gym and actually use the gym to build your body up rather than just break your body down. It's a specific way of going through a program, going through exercises, sequencing things, specific heart rates, breathing exercises, a bunch of stuff I've put together that I've found stimulates recovery. And so I think people now have a different way of going to the gym and thinking, hey, I don't need to go in today and kill myself. I actually need to go in the gym and use my training as a way to stimulate recovery. That to me is a much more effective way than trying to go into a cryotherapy chamber twice a week, or trying to, go do ice baths every day. All those sorts of things are just Band-Aid. You shouldn't get to the point where your body is, needing those things all the time. You should put things together in a way that your body is naturally able to recover through its daily routine of training and life and sleep and everything else.
Yeah, and you feel so good after you do those recovery workouts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the biggest thing people know is, like, you shouldn't always walk out of the gym feeling destroyed. You should walk out of the gym feeling better than you went in. And if you can just do that at least as many times a week as you walk out on the other side, you're going to be far better off.
And Joel, what's the youngest age that you've used HRV with? Have you used it with kids at all? Like, what would you say?
We've had quite a few youth teams. We had a team in China that was a national level judo team, and that was ranging from early teens to late teens. But it's, I would say in your mid teens is probably reasonable. If you're talking about a whole lot younger than that, I mean their attention span is not the best in the world. And the reality is, the young kids they can recover so quickly just from the fountain of youth, that not there's no value in measuring, because there certainly is, but they can just handle so much more than your average person, it's not as important at that point. Once they start getting into the later years, their teens and their 20s and 30s and 40s, the more and more important recovery becomes. That's actually what we've seen is a good percentage of the Bioforce Morpheus users are people in their, mid 20s, late 20s, mid 30s, people that realize they can't recover as fast as they could when they were younger, and realize that their bodies just don't perform the same as they used to. And they're the ones who are really looking more and more for these types of ways to measure and improve it. So again, you can use it certainly in the younger ages, but I think the biggest value comes from the people that are going to be more recovery challenged, and that typically tends to be the little bit older population.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And Joel, this is one thing I was always curious about. Does Demetrious Johnson look at his HRV score the morning of an actual fight?
Yeah, usually. I mean, here, what the mistake people make is HRV in recovery, it doesn't predict performance. Okay, that's, I think, a misconception there. We can't see your HRV is low and mean that you're going to perform poorly, or if your HRV is high, you're going to perform well. It doesn't work like that. What's really showing you in a nutshell is, again, where your body is distributing energy. So if your body is distributing energy towards recovery, it means your body is in the middle of recovery. And it doesn't mean you can't perform. It just means right now your body is trying to get recovery, increased and accelerate those processes. But really what it's telling you is how long it's going to take for you to recover from, a high level of stress. So for example, if Morpheus shows my recovery is 60%, what that's really telling me is if I go do a really high intensity workout, it might take me, let's say, 3 days to get back to normal. If my recovery is at 90%, it might only take me a day and a half or 2 days to get back to normal. So really what it's a better gauge of is how fast can I recover from something that I'm about to go do. If my recovery score is high, I'm going to recover quickly. I'm going to respond to it very, very well. If my recovery is low, I don't have the energy to deal with it very well. It's going to take me a whole lot longer to get back to normal. So looking at your HRV in the day of competition doesn't really tell you like, hey, you're going to perform well or you perform slow. It's more about, hey, this competition is going to take you a week to get back to normal, or hey, your body's already fairly recovered. So you're going to be able to perform and get back to normal in 2 or 3 days or whatever. So it's a little bit different than, thinking that your HRV equals performance. It really isn't quite that simple.
Okay. Thanks for explaining that. And just as a final wrap-up question, do you have any last words of wisdom or anything you would like to leave our audience with?
I think the biggest thing like I said, I've learned over the years is people struggle because they're trying to follow, some other person's program, some generic program they found online or some program that they put together without really understanding their own body. So the more you can tap into your own body, the more you can learn how your body responds to all these things, the more effective your program's going to become. And that starts with, just that understanding of, hey, I'm going to track information about my body and I'm going to measure the outcome. And that's really what Morpheus and HRV and these tools allow you to finally do, is not just see how many steps you took or see how many calories you burned, but see ultimately how your body is responding to all that. So if you can start with the idea that I'm going to try and learn as much about myself as I possibly can, and then you start with add that with a mindset of, I'm going to try to walk out of the gym feeling great at least as many days as I walk out of the gym feeling tired. If you add that mindset into the idea of personalization, you're going to see a whole lot better progress. You're going to have a whole lot better health and wellness, and you're going to see a lot better just results in general. And I think those are the two biggest things that are missing is personalization and the right mindset. If you can do those two things, start with the right mindset, add personalization, you're going to be a whole lot better off, and you're going to find that your training is going to pay off 10 times more than trying to go to the gym every single day and kill yourself, because it doesn't work. People have tried that. It doesn't work in the long run. It's a very short-sighted strategy, and ultimately you pay the price for that. So that's my biggest advice for everybody is learn what works for you individually and have a way to do that, and then start with the right mindset of it's not about intensity, it's about training smarter rather than just trying to kill yourself all the time.
I love it, Joel. And if people want to learn more about you and Morpheus, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my main site is just 8weeksout.com, just number 8weeksout.com, and then trainwithmorpheus.com is where they can find Morpheus, or we have links on that at 8weeksout.com as well, so either one will work.
Great stuff, and I'll have that in the show notes. Again, main website, 8weeksout.com, and if you want Morpheus, go to trainwithmorpheus.com. I highly recommend it. Joel, it was a pleasure having you on the show, and thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, great to be here, and hope to come on again sometime soon.
There it is. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Joel Jamieson. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, if you want the timestamp show notes and links to everything we discussed in this episode, just head over to anchorsofhealth.com/25. That's it for me, and I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.